the reforms that Moldova is implementing now? Is it moving fast, or it could move faster?
I think Moldova has achieved a lot over the last 2 years. I do not want to say that nothing has been achieved before. Even under the communist government, a number of some progress has been achieved. However, we feel that the real impetus has started 2 years ago. That concerns in particular the relations to the European Union, which have become much more intensive as they have been before. Inside the country, in the domestic field, some progress has been achieved, but of course more could have been done if there had been unity of the country, meaning that all political parties in the alliance and the opposition would have been united on some issues. However, I think given these difficult circumstances, considerable progress has been achieved in many areas, and the EU stands ready to continue supporting these efforts, and we have done so in the past. I think in all areas progress has been achieved. In a number of areas Moldova is probably a little bit further behind than others for historic circumstances, for the simple fact. Let me give the area of environment as an example. There the European Union is probably the leading area in the world when it comes to environmental protection. So it is obvious that there Moldova has to catch up in particularly a lot. However, financial resources are needed for this, and of course EU, while providing a lot of financial support, cannot provide all for this. So it is clear that this area, for instance, will take probably a little bit longer than other areas to catch up with European standards. What is most important at this moment for Moldova is obviously the area of justice. And I think Moldova is now on the right track. The reform of the justice and of the law enforcement area sector has finally started, which was of utmost importance for us as well, because we think that many other areas will depend on progress in these two crucial areas. When the rule of law and investment security, for instance, will predominate, then of course the whole country can develop in a better way, because much more support can be provided and will be provided from the outside. The progress that has been achieved so far will now be hopefully soon measurable when the justice reform will be launched, and following the setting up of a strategy, of a sector-wide strategy in the justice sector, which we will, if we are convinced, we will support this through a sector budget support worth 50 million euros next year. I was a bit surprised by the reaction of some politicians. To this
there were a lot actually.
Since the fact that the honeymoon is over means actually that we have become a real couple, and that the partnership should now develop on a higher level than it has perhaps been before. And this is what I wanted to say, that of course we have provided a lot of support in the beginning of our new relationship, if I may call it like this, after the events of April, the 7th of April, and that we have provided you start-up funds if you want to build up a new society directed to the respect of human rights, the rule of law, democracy and so on. And now these first steps have been done, but now of course we would also like to see some first results of these start-up funds, what has been done with these start-up funds that the European Union has provided.
Did the Moldovans report on these funds? What did they do? Something?
Well, obviously we are quite well informed about the use of the funds, because we have access to all players, and we are satisfied with what has been done. Of course it can always be better, but you know our functioning, let me give you the example for budget supports. We pay only tranches according to the actions that have been delivered by the Moldovan side, and we estimate exactly the amount. So for a given budget support, we estimate exactly how many of the obligations have been fulfilled, and then the amount is calculated. Say, if only 60% of what we wanted to be achieved has been achieved, we will pay only 60% of the funds. So this is the simple mechanism. And in other areas it is simple. Obviously we will provide resources only if we are convinced that the objectives that we want to achieve with these funds can be achieved.
Moldova wants more for more, and as the EU idea is, and is expecting Moldova to be treated separately from other countries in the region. So what should we expect from this summit?
Well, the summit is first of all an event for all 6 members of the Eastern Partnership. That means all countries will be looked at carefully. The situation will be, it's a stock taking of the progress that has been achieved since the initiative of the Eastern Partnership has been launched. There's no doubt that Moldova is among the front runners among the Eastern Partnership. I think it is too early to talk on where exactly the country stands vis-à-vis to other countries. Also, we would not like to compare. I think every country will be regarded by its own merits. That's what we have said very clearly. In this context, Moldova is among the front runners and can expect certainly more than perhaps some other countries can expect. What concrete result we can achieve, I think it is, we have still 2 weeks' time. Discussions are still ongoing. What exactly can be done? The objectives for Moldova, I think, are clear. We want to launch as soon as possible the negotiations on a deep and comprehensive free agreement. We are currently analyzing whether we can move to the second phase of the so-called visa dialogue. And of course, we want to conclude the negotiations on the association agreement. And in the case of Moldova, we also want to continue and hopefully conclude still this year the negotiations on an aviation agreement.
Prime Minister said that there is a possibility that in 2002 Moldova to have a facilitated visa regime. How do you look at this perspective?
A facilitated visa regime Moldova has already received by the European Union. We have a so-called visa facilitation agreement in place since 2007, under which a number of categories of people receive easier visas, receive longer-term visas than other third countries, if I may say so. The visa fee for Moldova is with 35 euros for a single visa, lower than for other third countries, where it is 60 euros. And as I said, we have the visa center in place, which is very efficiently run by the Hungarian embassy, in which, if I'm not mistaken, 14 countries are taking place. That means Moldovan citizens do no longer have to travel to either Bucharest or Kiev or even to Moscow to receive their visas. The visa dialogue is the next step, which we have launched already in June last year, meaning in a very short period after the visa facilitation agreement has entered into force. We are very optimistic that this visa dialogue can go into the second phase. When exactly this will be depends on the analysis which is currently being carried out by our experts. We need the green light from both the Commission and the Council for this. And as soon as this is done, then we can go into the second phase, which will be then another step forward on a way to a completely visa-free regime.
The European Parliament voted the previous week recommendation for the European Council to give Moldova an aderation perspective. What does that mean for the simple citizen? What the simple citizen should understand from this preposition?
I would call it a sign of encouragement for the Moldovan people and also for the Moldovan politicians that the country is on the right track, that the people and politicians in Europe and the European Union are observing the progress with a lot of intention. I dare say that Moldova was perhaps not so known to many people 5 years ago or so, and I think now Moldova has become its place on the map of Europe, and it is of course a European country, no doubt about this. So the resolution by the European Parliament is an encouragement, an incentive for the country to move forward and to continue with the reform process in order to indeed achieve one day the perspective of EU membership, on which basis we could work even more concretely on a future membership of Moldova in the European Union.
Now the political bloc, how does EU look to the political situation in Moldova? That we have a lot of debates that are stopping in one way or another, moving forward with the reforms or other stuff. So how the EU officials are looking to this political mess that we have? We cannot elect the president, we have chicanes in between the politicians and
Well, it goes without saying that we would wish that the country should be politically stable. This is one of our main objectives, political and economic stability for the country. So in this context, we would of course very much like to see that a president would finally soon be elected, because otherwise your constitution says very clearly that new early parliamentary elections will have to be held. And I think we all know that such new elections are very likely not to improve the situation, but not to overcome the impasse, but to result in a very similar result as you have had in the previous early parliamentary elections in December last year. Having said this, we are confronted with functioning institutions. We see that the country as such functions, even though there is only an acting president for 2 years, meaning we're working constantly with those institutions that are there. The work has progressed a lot with all main institutions, meaning with the government, with the parliament, with the president and his office, the acting president and his office. So all this works in principle well. However, as I said, we would very much like to overcome this problem, which is also used by some external forces and others as an excuse for not being able to cooperate closely with the country, and that is, I think, is in the interest of the Moldovan people and politicians themselves to overcome this impasse. However, having said this, I would like to say at the end as well that in many European countries there's not so much political stability at this moment either. So it is very difficult to criticize a country for something which is not the case in many European countries at this moment either.
The communist leader Vladimir Voronin said yesterday evening that we're going actually to next anticipated parliamentary elections because there is no understanding between the four parliamentary parties. How do you look at this? Actually, he said it frankly that we're waiting who says the first. So everybody, he said like this, everybody knows that we're going to have repeated elections, but we're waiting for the first to speak about this. So in this case, we have the worst situation that you described.
I think, as far as I can judge, the Communist Party so far is the only one who expressed itself in favor of early parliament elections. My impression is that none of the alliance parties that are currently in power have an interest in such early parliament elections. So that is why I would also like to appeal to the Communist Party to try, first of all, everything possible to find a compromise to elect a president. I know that the Communist Party has its own candidate, Madame Greciani, who I appreciate very much. However, the alliance parties have nominated Mr. Lupu as the presidential candidate. I think, first of all, a solution should be found to elect a president before we think of new elections. I think not all efforts have been made yet, or not all efforts have been exhausted yet to identify or to find a solution to this conflict.
Tell me about the view from EU about the Raider attack on the banks in the Moldova. Mm-hmm. How does it look from outside?
When I was informed about these raid attacks, it was early August, and I was in the middle, as many others, of my holidays. So obviously we were quite shocked by hearing what had been tried to do. In particular also because, in the summer hole, as we call it, the political summer hole, it was the only major event perhaps that happened in yes. Moldova. And that is why it received a lot of attention also in the European Union. I can tell you that this has gone to the highest levels of the European Union, with Commissioner Füle directly having become active, with politicians in Slovenia and the Netherlands having become active, with the leadership of the EBRD being involved. It was very important that this issue has now been solved through the decision of the Supreme Court of Justice of Moldova on the 14th of September, so that hopefully very soon the shares that had been stolen, if I may say so, from the European investors can be given back, because as I understand the state of play today, the shares have not yet physically been given back yet.
Yes. Also, there are some political actors actually from the parliament that said that there was no radar attack. It's a misunderstanding between the shareholders. How do you appreciate these declarations?
Well, I think I have spoken to the representatives of the European investors. They have made it very clear that there's no misunderstanding whatsoever. They have not had any idea what had happened. They have not been in contact with any of the organizations or institutions that have been said to be involved. I do not know how you would like to call it. We can also call it a stealing of shares. This is what in reality had happened in the case of Agro-Inbank. This is the case that I know best. For the other cases, other people will know better. So what is important now is, of course, that such cases do not repeat. I think the government and the institutions dealing with these issues have taken the right decision to change the legislation in a way that the central bank of Moldova will receive more powers. And indeed, this is a very important step, and I think also the new legislation foresees stricter control measures, which is also important, so that such cases cannot repeat in the future. It is also important to find the real culpable, the real responsible ones who have organized this, so that they can be brought to justice, and so that this action does not give an incentive to be repeated in the future.
In 2009, the young people from Moldova surprised the Europeans, the whole world, I would say, with those protests. How did the Moldavian politicians surprise the world? And how would you talk about the Moldova a successful country in this context?
I've been now here for about 2 years since I arrived here. I arrived only after the events of the 7th of April. However, the impression that I have got over these 2 years is that in principle, all parties that are represented in Parliament have the objective to bring Moldova closer to the European Union. Of course, in particular, the alliance parties, but not only. I have sometimes the impression that the final objective is the same for all parties, but the way how to achieve this objective is perhaps a little bit different. And of course, it goes without saying that the country could achieve much more if there was unity in the approach. It would look better to the outside world, it would look better in Europe. However, given these political circumstances, I think a lot has been achieved. I have counted the other day, I think the Prime Minister has been altogether 11 times in Brussels in his period in these last 2 years, which I think is a remarkable amount. We have had 6 commissioner visits here. If I tell you that from 1991 to 2 years ago, to September 2009, altogether 4 commissioner visits have taken place. This gives you an idea of what has happened. We had the President of the European Parliament, Mr. Buzek, here. We had the President of the European Council, Mr. Van Rompuy, on visit here, and many other European national politicians of high rank. This shows how intensive and close our relationship has got, and this is, I think, a clear proof that there is trust in Moldova. There is trust in the Moldovan politicians that currently are governing this country, besides all internal problems. Now, we can only, I think the whole of Europe hopes that these internal struggles will be overcome, that there will be united forces beyond, also into the opposition, and that this path to Europe, to the European Union, will be continued without major disturbances.